Good morning. It's Monday, so it must be Monday Market Memo. And it's Mary Bartos with the Bartos Group of Premier Plus Realty. And with me, I have the distinguished attorney at law, Peter Huey from Kramer Huey Law. Today, we're going to talk about, now you're in a contract here in COVID, what things have changed, what can we do differently, what are better, what's worse, what do we need to account for? And Peter has graciously decided to share those things with us this morning. So good morning, Peter.
Good morning.
Talk a little bit about the things that you think have changed as you see what's happening with COVID, the closing process from your perspective.
Okay. Well, yeah, you talked about better or worse, and some are better, some are worse. It's more like, what are we now kind of forced to do, whether it's worse, in some cases maybe better, and I'll get into a little bit of that. But yeah, we are seeing quite a few changes, as you can imagine. Starting from the initial deposits in the contract. Normally, that's our time where we can sometimes get to meet the clients first. We're not getting that anymore. We're mostly pushing wires so that there's less client contact, which is sad in one sense, but a necessity. And I think that would probably fall under the case of worse.
Right.
We're seeing a lot of, if you're a buyer on a mortgage, we're having to do a lot of extra work in making sure that that everything is kind of a mail away, that if it's not, that you're getting your loan packages sooner than later, so that if there's any issue, we can address those issues. If there's any questions, normally buyer comes in to sign a loan package, we're there to answer any questions, we're sitting right across the table from you. Now we're trying to get those out, maybe the day before, if not sooner, but usually sooner is not possible, and then having that conversation over the phone. And that goes for any signing of documents. If you're coming
I'm going to pause you for a second, because many of these folks may not know. So, the signing of the paper, there's a couple of things with that. If I'm cash,
so if you're cash,
I can just sign, right?
You can sign, we can take scanned copies. There isn't really that many issues. You're signing a closing statement, that type of thing, but nothing requires a notary. And notary is where these changes are, a lot of them are occurring. So no, cash, we're pretty much doing kind of the same thing.
Right.
We haven't seen too many changes with that.
Now, when I have a mortgage, the reason you may not have the package is because the mortgage company is sometimes validating whether I'm employed or not, and my income is there as of the day before. So a lot of times you're not getting that information a lot earlier, or you're getting a lot later than you once did, correct?
Yeah, timing is getting really tricky because you have to think, it's not just us getting the package. If the person is out of state and we're required to mail or email and have the originals mailed back, you have to account in for the travel of those documents as well, any delays with those documents. So we actually are seeing with a few different banks, we're seeing definitely some different procedures. A few where, both ways, where we funded before, bank will allow us to fund a day before actually having the original documents, which is somewhat unheard of. But hey, if
that's
there's
positive in
somebody
the new
that can
world,
do
right?
that, that's what we do. And then vice versa, where they will not allow us to fund until we have the original documents. So we would be funding usually maybe a day after closing, which
Right.
is also a little odd. The NABOR actually has a provision here that's been in there.
Our Naples
a while.
contract, for those of you, again, we're in Southwest Florida, so our Naples contract has a provision for.
It talks about how if a lender has a closing procedure, that closing procedure should be followed, and that's kind of where you fall. Whether you're a buyer or seller, you're kind of at the, and mercy is the wrong word, just if the lender, whatever they need to do, or whatever procedure they put in place, that's what we follow.
Sure. So we've got this package, and I think you were talking about their procedures. So wherever you're going to notarize.
Yeah, notaries have been, we've definitely seen a lot of issues with notaries. Now, we're still seeing them now. A month ago, there were some real issues where, people thought they could just go, out and get a notary just how they normally would. We had a lot of issues in New York, Illinois. Trying to think if there's another state as well we're having issues with. where it caused significant delays. They just didn't know, and they didn't know that they couldn't just show up somewhere to get it notarized. They didn't know that they couldn't just go to a bank without an appointment, and they're getting turned away. And we had a couple where if the FedEx has to go out by 5:30 or whatever time, and they're going to get it notarized at 4, and they can't, all of a sudden now we're behind a day because they just missed the FedEx timing to get the package out.
Which impacts if you're buying and you want to be in that property. Obviously, if you're away, probably aren't going to be in there. But if the seller's buying and all this tumble of time goes down, then we've got some impacts.
Yeah, I mean, we just had one, I think it was on Friday, where we closed a transaction in the morning, then used that money, the seller proceeds from that money, to close a second transaction in our office, and then use the seller proceeds from that transaction and send it to another title company, and they closed a third transaction all in one day.
Yeah.
So in that chain, if something goes wrong on those first two, the third one doesn't happen.
Right.
So yeah, there's a lot of considerations that you wouldn't have necessarily thought of before on timing. Particularly with notaries, knowing the policy that whatever your state is. Even locally, I don't know if the banks have opened back up, but I know, SunTrust down below, they were only accepting appointments for the longest time. So just knowing what your policy is, giving yourself enough time. If you can't or are uncomfortable with figuring out the notary situation, we can arrange for a mobile notary. We just need to know.
Which is new.
Yeah, it's semi-new.
It's a plus for us.
They may have been around for a decent amount of time, but they've become very, very popular
Right.
of late. But the problem with that is, if you tell me the day of, I'm probably not going to be able to arrange for it.
Right.
Even if you tell me 48 to 72 hours before, I'll probably be able to, but they don't even like that. Usually we like to know right up front, schedule it a week in advance, because the company has to locate a notary who's willing to go do that.
Sure.
And hopefully that, just doesn't, as we go further and further, hopefully there's no second wave, and hopefully that just eases up tremendously.
Right. It's interesting because a lot of our second home buyers are coming in from other states. So we do have a lot of this mail away. And most of the time, I can tell you in the state of Florida, at least in the Naples area, where just the buyer or the seller is with our closing agent, in this case, our attorney. Some states, everybody sits around the table together, which I can't imagine what changed in their worlds. But for us, it was just, hey, we have some more hoops that we have to go through to get things closed.
Yeah, Florida is, at least we're in our location, I'd say even before the crisis or the pandemic, I'd say more than 50% of our closings were mail away anyways.
Yeah.
So we were, already kind of set up that way. Notaries weren't an issue though. But yeah, so I mean, it kind of lended itself to the situation.
Exactly. Now, the buyer, if you're buying cash, no notary, mortgage, notary, seller, always a notary, correct?
Yeah, because there's a warranty deed involved. It's not just the notary too, you need another witness as well. So it's not just locating a notary, you need a witness.
Okay.
We had this, that's been an issue where they found a notary, but they couldn't find a second witness.
Oh my.
You just have to plan, that's all.
Yeah.
It's just not one of those things where, I'll go get my documents signed.
Which in the world before COVID, we would just kind of show up and, the bank or wherever you had would just do it.
In the world before COVID, the signing the documents was more like an errand.
Yeah.
Now it's, plan, preparation, making sure that that's going to actually get done.
And it's an appointment. Let's face it, we all love appointments. So, it's just a little extra. I know, you're saying no, Mary, it's not quite. That's interesting. A lot of things that we talked about as well is, looking at the contract and talking with you guys. Because oftentimes before COVID, you were just getting the client after they'd signed everything.
Right, and it just depends on the realtors that's involved. I mean, with you guys have a Jake, so he handles.
Yes.
The customers don't actually see what takes place before the contract is actually formed. If there's an issue, Jake will call me, ask me about it, and I'll tell him, what the answer is, and he'll take care of it. And then I have no customer contact, which is good and bad, but it's very efficient because I can have a 2-minute conversation with him, whereas if a customer calls up, it's probably going to be a 30-minute conversation.
Well, and to that end, as a consumer out there, we oftentimes, if there's things outside of those quick little things in the contract that, not that they're little, but quick items in the contract that we want to make sure is protecting whomever is signing it. If it's outside of that, then we do want to set up an appointment with the attorney and quickly have those conversations, whether it's 30 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever, to make sure, like, a 1031 exchange, if there's questions on that, a foreign investor, somebody that's got this, this domino effect of properties and what's going to happen in that and what that looks like, because there can be some contingencies that we need to have in there that they may want to feel comfortable with.
Right, and it's not just that. I mean, if we can resolve an issue before the contract is signed, it actually makes my life a lot easier.
Yeah.
It makes the transaction smoother. That way we're not doing amendments after the fact and hoping that the other party agrees to it. And don't get me wrong, I mean, even if it's a small issue and the customer just wants to hear from an attorney, we welcome that.
Right.
It's like a little break from the day. I like to talk to people, so it's
Hence why you're on video. You're talking
particularly
to a
right
lot.
now where we're not getting much social interaction, so I've been probably indulging more than I should with conversations with clients. But no, even if if it's a complicated issue, definitely we want everybody to feel comfortable. We want the that contract to be written correctly. But even if it's a small issue, I don't mind. Obviously, actually enjoy it.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's been an interesting thing. One last pointer that I had in my notes was making sure the consumer, you as a buyer or seller, read the contract. How many times do you find when they really just haven't taken the time to read the contract?
Right, and so if it's a complicated issue, I got to refer back to that contract every so often. And actually, I like to, even if I get asked a question on something. So we're not expecting you to understand, the standards within the contract or the more complicated stuff. But we would like you to read, kind of your due dates,
Yes.
when your deposits are due particularly. We see a lot of times where clients will sign the contract and it's like, oh, we're done. Closing's not for 30 to 45 days, so we don't have to do anything. Well, no, your first deposit's coming due within 3 days.
Yes.
And it helps to just know those dates, know when you have to have your inspections by if you're a buyer, know get your mortgage application underway. Just knowing those basic type of things. We don't expect you to dive into, I don't know how many pages that contract is. It's quite a few.
Quite a few. I think 11 or 12.
But just knowing timelines, I think, is what can be really helpful.
And working with an agent, obviously like the Bartos Group, we're going over those and saying, hey, is this going to be a problem? How much is this, we're going to wire this, right? Those kinds of things, because that's incredibly important to hit those. And Jake Pekarski on our team also sends out emails with those dates reminding our folks of that. So, I don't know, Peter, were there any other closing thoughts that you had on what we wanted to talk about today?
You cannot get out of the contract simply because of COVID. COVID is not a magic word that gets you out of your contract. To cover that, obviously COVID is not covered in the contract. Nobody foresaw to put in for pandemic issues or contingencies. The NABOR contract calls for good faith and fair dealing, so you've got to, depending on what the situation is, the goal here is the parties stay in contract and complete the closing, and that covers it. If there's a notary issue because of COVID, okay, well, the other side, may be required to absolutely work with you to maybe even extend closing, again, depending on what the situation is, to allow the closing to occur. But the idea behind that contract is to move forward, not to kill it. And COVID is not, just saying COVID does not kill the contract.
Well, and to that end, we at the Bartos Group had the pleasure of helping. We're in the process of closing about 52 families' contracts right as we went into the pandemic. And we only had a few that actually didn't close and go through the entire thing because of COVID. We had to pivot and move around, and with a great attorney, make sure that things were covered, but very few didn't go. Now we're at a different place, we're all kind of used to, I hope this isn't the new norm for some things, Peter,
Right.
but it may be in other things, but we're used to it now. We were essential, which when we first started, we weren't sure if we were going to be. So we're very blessed in the state of Florida in our area to be essential, to continue to do business during that time, whereas some states were not. So to my friends that struggled with that are realtors out there, we certainly feel for you. To the buyers and the sellers that are out there, we've been really blessed to be able to go forward with that. Again, we love all your questions. We didn't take them live here answering them, so if there were some questions, we'll get those answered. We'll get a video out to you as well. It's always a pleasure, Peter, to have you as a guest.
Thank you for having me.
Anywhere. Again, Peter Huey with Kramer Huey Law here in Marco and Naples, and I'm Mary Bartis with the Bartis Group of Premier Plus Realty, and this is Monday Market Memo, and we look forward to seeing you next Monday. Who we will have as our guest, Panther Inspection, and Jim Scarpa will come on, and during COVID, what that looks like and if there's any changes. So until next Monday, ciao.